This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 151.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
What's up, Benny the Beard? Oh, it's going to touch the floor soon.
Soon enough. That is the goal. But it's going well. Both the beard and I are growing strong. A little scraggly, mind you, but we can fix that up later. How are you doing? How's father times 3 now?
It's good. It's good. I'm hanging out a lot with my other two, with my oldest two, because I can't really do much with the youngest, who's breastfeeding. So I'm kind of useless there. I put her to sleep every once in a while, but that's pretty much it. The other two are nuts. They're bananas. They're virtual schooled, and it's in French. I don't speak French. So my oldest son can tell me anything, and I will believe him. It's like, oh, they asked me to go eat chocolate. All right, yeah, here's the chocolate.
Yeah, French chocolate. I mean, it's important.
Yeah. So it's been a while. This is like, I did 3 sessions in a row without a guest. It's just me coming up with topics on the spot. They weren't on the spot. It was pre-thought. But we're finally back. This is the first episode back, and we have someone special who I talked about last week, so it's not like it's a surprise. But Chris White is here again, so I'm excited to talk to him again.
Absolutely. And Chris is always such a great guest to have on because of all the great insights he always has. But I feel like this time in particular, he's more fresh off of trainings that he's been given to companies, and obviously, like with the world being virtual for as long as it has now, he's been able to, I guess, take the various insights that he's seen over the past few months and maybe even longer as well, and share that all with us, which is really cool. A lot of great insights for sure.
All right, so let's not just talk about it. Let's jump in. Welcome back, Chris, for the some 17th time. I don't know, like
who's counting, but thank you very much, Ramsey. It's good to see both you guys. It has been far too long, and it's my pleasure to be here, and congratulations. I understand this is your first episode or first session back after the big event in your household.
Yeah, it's the first interview back. I've been staying up late to come up with a few posts. I don't know if any of the guests would want to record an interview with me at 10 o'clock at night. So I just decided to do it on my own, keep it easy. But now that it's a little bit calmer in the house, just a little bit, I wanted the first interview to be back with you because we've been talking about this for a while, and we have some interesting chats, you and I, even.
Indeed.
Off the camera, so I wanted to bring you on.
Indeed.
How you been?
Well, man, better than I deserve, to be honest with you, Ramsey. So doing great, thank you. Very, very busy, and just trying to make the most of obviously a continuing difficult situation regarding the pandemic, but otherwise doing very, very well.
And so since we last talked, I think you were on the interview last with Scott Cassidy from Aslan Training.
Yes.
Right. And you've done a lot more training since then.
Yeah.
And the training you're doing is not SE specific, right? You're kind of, although it's like you're combining sales and sales engineering training in one shot, right? So you have both of them in the same room at the same time.
Yeah.
How's that been like?
It's really been transformational. Is probably the first word that comes to mind, Ramsey. And what's so great about it is it first happened about, I want to say, 8 or 9 months ago. I actually, in fact, I had a sales engineer leader who first saw me in the first show that I did with you.
Yay.
And as a result of that, reached out to me and said, hey, I'd love to talk to you about possibly bringing you in to do some training. And as we sort of went down the path, they got to a point where they decided to do a pilot workshop, but at the last minute, they came to me and said, hey, can we include our account executives in the workshop as well? And I, of course, I said I'd be delighted to. And incidentally, I'll sort of also make if I can make a plug for my sort of new brand. So, when I first joined you guys, I was Demo Doctor, and Demo Doctor still exists, but I'm rebranding to Tech Sales Advisors because virtually all of my training now is with sales engineers and sales together in the same room. And it is amazing what I've seen happen when they come together and put some of the issues on the table, frankly. And when the salespeople hear how the sales engineers are being instructed and sort of, guided to sort of engage differently and behave differently, right? The sales folks are getting so excited, about that too. So I know, I'm sure you have more specific questions, but it's really been for me to, I mean, obviously I'm the sort of the facilitator, but for me to participate and witness some of the sort of transformational conversations that have been taking place, it's just awesome. It's really awesome.
So I've been in a couple weird spots where, as a sales engineer, I was invited to attend training with salespeople, but it was purely sales training. Right? We did the solution selling training, where they talked about everything that was related to sales, and every time I'd ask a question like, "But how does the SE fit in?" The presenter didn't really know the answer. My manager would have to step in and say, "Well, this is how we do it. This is how we see things." And also, I've been through training where, being a hybrid sales engineer, I was able to attend sales in my current company, sales training, but they kicked out all the SEs. They sent the SEs back home after the technical training. So why do you think it is? How have you been able to merge the two training, and what benefit is it for both of them to attend kind of training that's also geared towards sales engineering?
Yeah. And no, I'm glad you asked. And if I may, I'm gonna sort of as we like to say, double click on one of the things that you said there. And I've been saying for a long time, in fact, I think I've been saying for years that sales training doesn't work for sales engineers because many sales engineers, if not most sales engineers who attend sales training, they don't think it's for them, right? Like, if sales training falls on deaf ears for many sales engineers, because many of us, first of all, and that's why the first part of my program is we are in sales. We have to accept that we're in sales, but we don't necessarily think of ourselves just in sales, for starters, right? But also sales, a lot of sales training focuses more on those skills that are truly pure sales activities, right? Whether it's prospecting or qualifying, or certain things that are truly sort of on the salesperson. Here's the interesting sort of disruptive truth, though. I believe, and I've come to believe, demo training in and of itself doesn't work either, because demo training is delivered as if sales engineers operate in a vacuum, but they don't, right? So your question is, how have I bridged that gap, and how do the salespeople feel about coming to these programs? First of all, that's one of the reasons I changed the name, because I was like, it's for a salesperson to come to a workshop being given by someone from Demo Doctor, they're probably thinking to themselves, what does this have to do with me, right? So that's one of the reasons I've shifted the name, but I'm calling it team sales training or team selling training, right? And the way I describe it is, this is training for the middle of the funnel. How do we function effectively as a team, right, in the middle of the funnel, and remove friction from the middle of the funnel? But by the way, it's based on the 6 habits, right? And habit 1 is to partner with our sales counterpart, right? So we sort of put on the table, what are some of the challenges we face? What are some of the differences, the fundamental differences that we have, and how can we begin to bridge that gap? So, and the one final thing I'll say, and then I'll pause, is that your question's so good, because honestly, I've thought that going in, like when I start a workshop, I'm thinking to myself, I need to explain to the salespeople in the room, why is somebody who wrote a book about sales engineering giving this why is this person qualified to give this sales training, right? And so I explain, first of all, I've been on both sides of the equation, but more importantly, this is about how do we function better as a team, right? So, amen. Good question. I'll pause there because I don't want to hear myself talk just ad nauseum. So
that's what you're here for, but okay.
Well, but I want to make sure I come up for air every once in a while. So
Yeah. Vinny, yeah, you're on mute, Vinny.
Sorry, thank you. My mistake. Classic mistake there. But I mean, obviously, you talking on is it ad nauseum? It's pretty decent when there's so much gold within what you're saying. So, bit to unpack there, I suppose. One of which is that just that whole concept of focusing in on the middle of the funnel is such a great way to differentiate yourself. I mean,
yeah,
you're totally right. Like, I don't think there's that much targeted training on that particular activity. There's certainly a lot of things going, or in that area, I suppose. Like, there's a lot of activities to move a deal along the funnel, but ultimately to get to the close, or how to qualify and get those leads into the funnel at the very beginning. But all those little actions in the middle definitely seem to be overlooked a bit. So kind of focusing in on that is really, really cool. There's one question though that, if you don't mind me asking, so
please.
I'm sure we'll go into maybe some of the details about things as we go, but have you found that that salespeople or sales reps, as you're kind of talking to them and kind of training them on things that they might not have been as exposed to in the past, do you find that they've been almost craving this knowledge after you present it to them? Obviously, SEs I'd imagine, are craving the salespeople training or knowledge, I guess, that you're able to give to them. But does it work the other way around, where sales reps are really happy to be seeing the other side?
Yeah, it's a really insightful question, Benny. I think a resounding yes, actually. I think, and I think from a couple of perspectives. I think from one perspective, they're eager and frankly, to a certain degree, like incentivized, right, to see their sales engineers sort of be more productive, more engaged and engaging, right? So I think they sort of come with an anticipation of, sort of seeing how is it that our sales engineers are being enabled, right? And they want to understand sort of what they're being told. But I think the other part of it is they're learning how to better communicate with their sales engineers. And they're starting to understand some of the mistakes that they are making that are producing some of the problems that they think are sort of, coming from the other side, so to speak. And let me give you a perfect example. One of the things, in fact, that Ramsey, you and I did a webinar, I think at one point last year, and I talked about that matrix of sort of the different, I talked through that matrix of how they're different, yep. Right? And what one of the dimensions that we talked about is salespeople. What do salespeople fear the most in the context of the deal? Losing the deal.
Yep.
As they should. That's their job. As a sales engineer, I want to be working with a salesperson who's terrified to lose a deal, right? What do I, as a sales engineer, fear the most about losing the deal? Go ahead.
I know that one. Credibility.
Exactly. We fear losing credibility, right? Like, yes, the deal is important, but this is my reputation we're talking about here. When we hit certain points like that, you can literally see like lights come on for some of the sales folks in the room, like, okay, wow, I hadn't really thought about it that way, right? And they realize that there's certain assumptions that they've been making that are just wrong, right? So that's where they sort of get sort of activated, right? Where they're like, okay, I'm learning new ways to communicate with my sales engineer in ways that will help them help me. You know what I mean? So, Benny, does that answer your question?
Yes. Oh my goodness. So very much so. And just that insight that a salesperson would have to things that they didn't know that they were doing that might have been preventing their SE to be the most effective that they could be is, yeah, I mean, like Ramsey put a really fun comment. I think it was in response to this, but
it's a question. It's a question I want to ask. Why don't they already know that?
Right?
Why don't salespeople already know that? Right? Like, we kind of think about like what salespeople want and all that, but have you found a reason why they haven't figured that out after, I don't know, 20 years of being salespeople?
I mean, I guess I have a couple different directions I can go with in that, right? I mean, first of all, it depends on the seniority of the people you're dealing with, right? That's one. Another, to a certain degree, it's human nature, right? I mean, it's so easy for us to project onto others the way we think, right? And what do we tend to do? We tend to interpret what we tend to project an intent and a motive on the things that we see and hear, right? Rather than just dealing with what it is that we're seeing and hearing, right? The third thought that comes to mind, Ramsey, and you guys know this, right? It's one thing to know, it's another thing to do, right? And more times than not, when the salespeople hear some of the things that I talk about, they're like, okay, yeah, I know that. We just forget, right? Particularly in the heat of the battle, right? The other thought that just came to mind, and Benny, this goes back to your question a little bit too, and this is, again, for me, this is part of probably one of the more satisfying parts of running these workshops, is I literally see people letting down their guard and sort of disarming themselves and sort of putting their ego on the back burner, right? And they when they hear one of the exercises we do is I'll ask both parties. I'll send them to separate breakout rooms, the sales in one breakout room and sales engineers in another breakout room. And I'll say, first, what do you expect from your counterpart, right? And they both have to do that. And then the second question that they have to answer is, what should your counterpart expect from you? And then we come back together and they share. And invariably, what they discover is that what sales expects from sales engineers aligns very closely with what sales engineers says they should be expecting, and vice versa, right? So they go, we've been wanting the same thing all along. We're just not communicating in the right way, right? And when we go through that exercise and people become a little bit vulnerable and transparent, man, it becomes as much team building as it does instructional on my part. So does that resonate with you guys?
Yes, quite a bit. And as a matter of fact, I just did what you said. I projected. Like, for me, I spend my waking hours trying to figure out what other people think, what they want from me, and how I can help them being an SE. And I project, like, why don't salespeople do that? Right?
Yeah.
What? And it's pretty much exactly what you think. And
Yeah.
yeah, everybody knows what they need to do to get six-pack abs. Not many people do it, right? Knowledge isn't everything. It's doing is important. Benny, I think you had a comment as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, quickly on the six-pack abs, I'm pretty sure it's just a steady diet of like KFC and Five Guys, right? I think.
Pretty much,
yeah. That and healthy doses of beer, right? I mean, that
yeah,
that would get you there.
That's what I hear. That's the one that I'm following. But yeah, a quick question I had about, I guess just the, I don't know if it's like pulling the veil on the misconceptions that each party had about their expectations that the other had on them. But do you think that the training that you're giving now, as you're giving it right now, is that something that you think would have been as effective if you had maybe given it, I don't know, let's say 10, 15 years ago before? And this is just my like speculation, as like my experience in the SEing world is very concentrated to everything that's happened over the last few years. And obviously there's a huge resurgence with respect to the resources out there, the people out there that are representatives of the SEing community and SE world. And I think just the brand of sales engineering in general has really increased quite a bit right now. And the identity of an SE has definitely increased and has been better defined now. Do you think that there's just been like SEs were just not looked as people, I guess, versus tools for the longest period of time? And that's why that could be maybe also another reason why there's these mismatched expectations.
It's an interesting question. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that your comment about, I think, sales engineers being viewed more strategically now than, let's say, certainly a decade ago is the case. And frankly, I just think that there's more awareness in the market, right? There's more awareness from a sales enablement perspective. There's more awareness from a sales training perspective. I think there's maybe more awareness from like the C-suite perspective. And by the way, that's evidenced by we not only do we have software vendors popping up what seems like left and right? we now have investment money, right? We have investor money flooding this space, right? Which is clear indication that there's newfound sort of, interest. But here's the interesting thing, and I may have said this on your first show, the first show that I was a part of. I gave the first version of my training, and admittedly, it's different. But I gave the first version of my training probably, 10 years ago, right? To the team of sales engineers that I was working with at the time. And within about a year or two of that, I was giving that training to the entire sales organization, not just the sales engineers, because my CEO at the time recognized the value of everyone understanding this is how we need to operate, right? This is how we need to function together. So although the answer I think is yes, I think because there's more awareness now, I think it's taking on that much more sort of prevalence. I have evidence that 10 years ago this was a critically important conversation. So I don't know if that effectively answers your question or not, Benny.
I think it does. I think that we're definitely seeing like the not even necessarily the impact, but I guess even just general interest and understanding out there of the impact of your training that has on companies, I think is probably more widely accepted now. Whereas while it was probably equally as effective maybe 10 years ago, probably wasn't as sought after or as well known about, I suppose.
Completely agree. Completely agree. Well, and make no mistake. I think the sales engineer leaders have more a seat at the table now than ever before within organizations. So, and just the fact that companies like SAP have the pre-sales academy, right? And Salesforce has what they call their Scout program, which is an onboarding program. It's like a 6-month boot camp for new hire sales engineers, right? So there's no doubt that the tide is turning for sure.
I want to bring it back to something you said. You said that everybody knows, like they have the same expectations of each other, but they never communicated that. Now, here's the problem that I see. Not everybody has a Chris. If they could buy one, they should have one, so they should reach out to you. But how can we improve communication on a day-to-day basis? Yeah, I feel like this could be like a 5-hour topic of conversation. But if you were to summarize it, how can we improve communication between salespeople and SE without fearing ramifications of someone getting pissed off and someone getting fired?
Yeah. I have a couple thoughts. Firing, and first of all, I even want to sort of address what you said that I mentioned that most people know, right? And it's true. I mean, I think in fact that I start all of my workshops now by asking people if they know what the root word to education is, and most people don't, right? The root word of education is educe. And what does the word educe mean? It means to draw out. Education is all about drawing out that which is already there. We can't learn anything that we don't already understand or know on some level. And all education is really just sort of making new associations and new connections, right? So to your point, right? Like, and I open my workshops. Like in many cases, we do have those answers inside of us, right? But they need to be sort of, awoken, right? Now, to get to the heart of your question, which is how can we improve communication? I really believe that it starts with one of my favorite sayings. You guys have heard me say it before. Sales is a team sport, right? The moment, and by the way, once we accept that, we have to set our ego down, right? This is not about me, right? This is about us as a team. And if we're truly what I call servant salespeople, right? It's really about the customer, right? So we need to prioritize the customer. So if we need to have a difficult conversation, it really needs to begin with, first of all, what's in the best interest of the customer, right? Like let's start there. and let's drop the ego, right? So that's number one. Number two, and again, I would just say getting our mindset right? We just have to get our mindset straight. The second thing, and look, anybody who listens to this, this is not going to come as a shock to them. We just need to become better listeners. We really need to become better listeners, and we need to sort of know. I always, whether I'm talking with my colleagues or my kids or my wife, and we're talking about how should we approach this, I would say know what your position is and know what you're trying to sort of achieve or accomplish with the conversation, right? And go into it with the right sort of attitude, right? And sort of be patient with the process. So those are some of the thoughts that come to mind, Ramsey. Again, I'll pause there. Does that resonate with you and sort of touch on what you were sort of going towards?
Yeah, in a way, like the way I've worked with many different salespeople. Some were good, some were not so good, but a lot of them, their main interest was more about selling than it was about what's best for the customer. Right? What's best for the customer came after the fact, like, hey, if we sell him this thing, he's gonna get pissed off, and then he's gonna come back and yell at us, right? Versus this is gonna work better for the customer, or so that's where I kind of see the difficulty when you're trying to communicate with someone who is worried about his next paycheck or her next paycheck because they need to pay for their $1 million house or whatever it is. I'm not judging.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's where my thought process is. How can you communicate with people and get them to think about the customer first? Maybe that's the better question. How can we get them to think about the customer first?
Yeah. So I'm glad you sort of rephrase it a little bit, because I do have some more specific things that I think particularly we as sales engineers can do to improve our communication with sales. I think the first is, as sales engineers, we need to understand that our sales counterparts experience a pressure that we don't experience.
Yep.
And they are under a pressure that we simply don't feel ourselves, generally speaking, right? The sales folks. So I do think that a big part of what drives salespeople certainly is winning the deals and hitting the quota, and they're financially driven. By the way, we're all financially driven. And I want to work with salespeople who are financially motivated, right? That if that's what drives them, I am perfectly fine with that, right? And I think it's very honest to acknowledge that, right? I think if we as sales engineers can remind ourselves, look, at the end of the day, if we don't hit quota, normally it's their heads on the line, not mine, right? So they're under a different sort of pressure. That I think that changes the temperature of that alone changes the temperature of the conversation, right? Number two, what do we know, right? This is another thing that we talked about, right? We just talked about what do they fear most, right? Yep. But what we know is what's most important to them is to close the deal, right? Yep. So I think if we want to have a difficult conversation or a conversation with our sales counterpart, maybe in regards to the approach or the strategy for the customer, I think a great way to do it is to, first of all, again, remind ourselves they're under a lot of pressure. We can even open with, look, I know you're under a lot of pressure, right? But open with, I have some ideas on the best way that I think to win this deal. Is it something that you'd be interested to have a conversation about? Would you be open to some input on what I think is going to give us the best chance to win this deal? There's not a salesperson on the earth who wouldn't be open to that conversation, right? Why? Because I'm associating the conversation with what he or she is most driven towards. Does that make sense, Ramsey?
100%. And something I want to say, like, if an SE is not aware of the pressure that the salesperson is under, I recommend that SE join a funnel review meeting with the VP of sales or the director of sales, and just
totally
I mean, you can watch it just to laugh if you want, just to see your sales guy. If you enjoy watching your sales guy getting tortured, that's a good thing. If you want to feel like you feel bad for them, you can do that as well. I did both.
It's
And
pain, and it's painful. Yeah.
scary. It's scary.
Yeah.
Like you have $1 million quota and you have like $500,000 in the funnel. You're getting beat up about it. So yeah. And second thing is, the goal of the salesperson and the SE might be, or the drive might be different, but the goal is the same. You want to sell the customer something that works. So it doesn't matter what the drive is, as long as we can work together. And if you can help the salesperson achieve the goal, it doesn't matter what the drive is, it's going to be a good relationship in the end.
Exactly. Go ahead, Benny.
Sorry, yeah, just to piggyback off that, I think once you kind of have that mutual understanding, or yeah, once both a sales rep and a SC has that mutual understanding that you both have the same goal, and I feel like that would make the rest of it maybe a little bit easier. I know personally for me, I was always super fascinated just kind of hearing or speaking to my sales reps about the stresses and maybe the frustrations that they had about whether it be quota or the things that they were being asked to do or whatever it may be. Or even just the fact like they're stressing about not getting a signature by the end of the month or whatever, and they're going to call again and reach back out and stay late at the office and all these things, and kind of digging into why they do all those things, which is so fascinating because I had no real insight to the real pressures that they're facing, but getting that perspective was helpful, I suppose, in kind of getting to that mutual understanding as to the struggles that we go through. And one last little thing, if I may, is that I came across, or one of a few different sales reps actually in my last place, they introduced me to this channel. I don't know if it was on YouTube first or LinkedIn first, but it's called Corporate Bro. It follows the sales. I don't know. Have either of you two heard of this before? Okay, fair. Wait, Renz, you have though?
Yeah, go ahead. Tell Chris about it.
I won't really explain it fully. I do recommend you check it out though, but it pretty much follows like a, I don't know, 20, 30 something sales rep kind of going through just making little funny skits or videos about corporate world as a salesperson. And the more I watch those and the more I speak to actual sales reps, I don't know if they're as, or I know they're parroting what the experience is like, but I feel like it's less and less parody and more a reflection of reality. And as an SC, it's really cool to see that because it really gives insight to their true raw emotions about kind of what they're experiencing versus maybe the more corporate way to go about it.
Yeah. And here's the reality, right? We on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, as I like to say, we have the tendency to think to ourselves, and we talked about this in that session we did, Ramsey. They have no idea how hard my job is, right? The salesperson's thinking that of the sales engineer, the sales engineer is thinking that of the salesperson, right? So again, we have to look to a certain degree. It's emotional intelligence, right? It's professional maturity, right? Neither one are going to be right or wrong all the time, right? And there are going to be moments where it's difficult. But if we get our mindset straight, for starters, right, and understand it's a team sport, and understand that, look, they're under a different kind of pressure than I am, right, and work hard to set expectations, right, who does what, when, how, right, and make sure we understand each other, and then hold one another accountable, right. That a big part of it is having the courage to hold our sales counterpart accountable to the expectations that are set, number one, and number two, being willing to be held accountable, right? And not take it personally when we need to have a difficult conversation, right? So I think this is a big part of it. So.
And I think they're both right. Neither one of them has any idea how hard the other person's job is. It doesn't negate the fact that it is hard. And
absolutely,
we're trying to do it to the best of our abilities, but as long as we respect each other, and it gets, if the team is doing well, it's so easy to respect each other.
Absolutely.
It's when the team, like, all right, we haven't hit our quota in like 2 years.
Yeah.
Now it's when, it's the SE's fault, it's the salesperson's fault. So that's where we need to kind of stick together more than any other time. So we kind of said a few things about salespeople. Is during your training, is there anything that salespeople have in common where they complain about an SE specifically, or a common complaint about sales engineers?
Yeah, I mean, a resounding yes. And here's what's great about some of the workshops that I've done is that not only will some of the sales folks share some frustrations, but even the sales engineers will admit to making those mistakes, right? So, for example, I mean, one of the things that salespeople hate the most is when we just get too technical, right? Somebody asks a question, we just go too deep, right? Or we just tell too much, right? Or overcomplicate the answer, right? Particularly if we do so in sort of a negative way, right? One of my favorite sayings, thou shalt not confess thy sins voluntarily, right? Thou shalt not offer cautionary advice voluntarily, right?
Yep.
That's something that and I've literally seen it where the sales engineers, the sales folks will sort of be very, because we're in a group setting, they'll be delicate with some of their observations, but then the sales engineers will sort of hear what they're saying and say, well, I'm the first to admit, sometimes I just default to, getting too technical, or I default to over explaining. And so that's probably one. I think the other, I think the biggest frustration, and it's so ironic, I think the biggest frustration that sales has is I think sometimes sales feel as though the sales engineers don't care about the opportunity, or they don't care as much as they do about the opportunity. And I don't, and what I've seen is that the sales engineers, that in most cases, the response is that's not the case at all. We care a great deal, right? And in many cases, they're like, well, we don't want to step on your toes. And they're like, well, I don't care about you stepping on my toes, right? Like if I need to do something differently, tell me, because I just want to win the deal, right? Like we just want to do what's best for the customer, win the deal, right? So things like that come out, right? Where the sales folks are like, or the sales engineers are like, well, we don't want to come on too strong. And the sales folks are like, why aren't you coming on stronger, right?
That's so funny. That's a conversation I had recently with one of my colleague SEs. So as a hybrid SE, I also have SEs who help me out with different deals. And one of them is taking the lead on a POC. And I messaged him a couple of times like, hey man, did you reach out to the customer after they got the equipment to see how they're doing? It's like, no, not yet. All right, when are you going to reach out to them? Well, I'll reach out to them tomorrow. Why not today?
Yeah.
Like this is the conversation I'm having. And then I call him up and he's getting frustrated with me, pushing him to call the customer. He's not telling me why he's not calling the customer today.
Right.
And I'm getting frustrated at him why he's not calling the customer today. And a lot of something I find SEs have in common, they're worried about pissing off the customer.
Right.
Right. And that's a valid worry. And that's something we need to talk about. But sometimes you have to tell me that. I can't read your mind. And as an SE, I used to do that as well. Like, hey, I haven't called the customer yet. Well, why haven't you? Well, I didn't want to bug him. Why don't you want to bug him? So that comes back to communication as well, and expectations, setting expectations from the salespeople as well.
Well, and I want to unpack that a little bit, because I appreciate you sharing that example. That's a great example. That call. Have you called the customer? No. Why not? Right.
Yep.
First of all, one of the things that, and this is sort of another thing that I've sort of added to my material as I've sort of been doing this for a while now, is when we do discovery, right? We want to use open-ended questions that get people talking, right?
Yep.
What's the best way to ask an open-ended question? Is to use the 6 interrogatives, right?
Yep.
What, how, when, where, right?
Yep.
The one we need to be careful of is why, because sometimes a question that begins with why can be interpreted as accusatory.
Attack. Yep.
Accusatory, exactly. So again, we'll take this scenario. I've got sort of a model now that I'm teaching people on how to have difficult conversations, right? And it's 3 words: expectations, observations, interpretations, right?
Yep.
This was my expectation. Let's take your case, for example, right? My expectation is that we would have gotten in touch with the customer at this point. So before I go any further, are my expectations wrong? Do I need to reset my expectations, or is that a reasonable expectation for me to have, right? And now we can have a discussion not about what he has done or hasn't done, but about my expectations, right? Oh, if my expectations are wrong, right? Then let's discuss that. And if I disagree, then let's have a disagreement on that, right? Now we're through the expectation part. Here's my observation. Well, if my expectation is right, my observation is that we haven't contacted am I correct? We haven't contacted. Is my observation correct? Right? And then the third is, well, then I'm inclined to interpret it as this. Is that the right way for me? Is my interpretation correct? Is that the right way to interpret that? Because again, if so, I don't want to, I'm not accusing, right? I'm just trying to understand. Because at the end of the day, we need to move this thing along, right? Do you see how that completely changes the temperature of the conversation, Ramsey?
Yeah, but here's the first thing that popped in my mind. Like when you think about it, yes, I agree with you. But the first thought that popped into my mind is I don't want to walk on eggshells while talking to my SE.
Absolutely not.
If I want to ask him why, he should be able to handle it because he's a grown man, right? How would we kind of get over that hump and try to implement what you were saying?
This is funny now. This is becoming a bit of a consulting conversation, which I love. So I'm going to share with you what I might share with a customer, or what I might share with like a prospect. You have competing principles at play right now. One of your principles is, I don't want to feel like I'm walking on eggshells around or with my sales engineer, right? That's one of your principles. Yep. Another one of your principles is you want to affect a change. You want to see a different behavior, right? And being direct like that, right, which addresses the first principle of I don't want to feel like I have to walk on eggshells, right? Yep. Isn't satisfying the second principle, right, or need, which is to affect change. The decision's yours. Yeah. Right? How are you going to prioritize those two principles? Are you going to prioritize, I don't want to have to walk on eggshells? Then continue to do what you're doing, and you may or may not get the results you want, right?
Yeah. So basically, you're not forcing anyone to do anything, but if you want to achieve something, you might have to change your behavior. Yep. Right? And that's what every leader, not just sales or sales engineer, every leader has to go through while talking to his or her subordinates.
Exactly.
I love that.
And by the way, what I just did with you is something that we call drop the rope, right? Drop the rope is it's simply recognizing everyone's freedom to choose, right? The analogy is like the tug of war, right? If you and I were in the same room and I walked up and handed you a rope, right? And you grabbed it and I pulled it, what would you likely do?
I'd fall back or I'd drop it. Probably fall back.
You'd probably pull back. You'd probably pull back against me. You're bigger than me, and it'd probably be me falling flat on my face, by the way.
Yeah. So I was trying to give
you would probably pull back. Why? Yeah. Because I pulled against you, right? Yeah. But the moment I drop the rope, there's nothing for you to pull against, right? Yeah. The idea is that people naturally resist they naturally resist change if they feel as though their right to choose is not being respected, right? That's really all it is. Like, look, here are a couple different options. Ultimately, the decision's yours, right? And I respect the fact that the decision's yours, but here's my position. So anyway,
it shows that you're just helping them out. You're not forcing them to do anything. You're giving them the options as you see them. You're not, and it's up to them to make. You're giving them the power to do whatever makes them feel happy. Go ahead.
Well, but by the way, there are also results, right?
Yep.
There are outcomes and ramifications, right? So maybe in this conversation, the outcome is, look, I just need you to know that we if we don't get in contact with the customer, if we don't, if we're not proactive in our communication, we may not get this deal. And I believe this is a very winnable deal. If we don't get this deal, I may be less reluctant, to lean on you with certain things moving forward, right? Or I may not have as much confidence moving forward as I'd like to have, right? And I'm sure you don't want to feel like I'm sort of micromanaging you, right? That's the other side of the coin. I respect your right to decide, but there's an impact, right?
Yeah.
There's an outcome tied to the decision you make, right?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
I feel like worst case too, like maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm just not thinking about this as thoroughly as I should or could, but I feel like worst case, you'd have that difficult conversation probably once, and you kind of tell that maybe they took it very poorly. But then right after that, you could probably then apply Chris's framework there about the observation, expectation, interpretation with that person about that situation, about the fact that, hey, like I observed that obviously you took this very poorly when we had this conversation, and there's obviously some strife between us. I thought we had an expectation, a professional expectation between ourselves that we could be very open and candid with feedback, always with each other's best interests at heart. And really, like, I'm not here to maybe, make you look bad or whatever. And then ask like, hey, like, is it fair that I interpreted the situation the right way? And then they'll have this understanding that you now have, which could hopefully make that conversation a lot easier down the road, perhaps. I just really love that framework about how that could be used in so many different ways.
Yeah. Well, and Benny, I love what you just said. Something you just said sort of triggered a thought, and that is when you do have that conversation, right? And by the way, it takes guts, right? Let's be honest. Like it takes, and I've worked with people who it takes them months to actually finally like have the difficult conversation, right? But when you finally sort of break through and have that conversation, it's typically going to go one way or the other, right? Either it's going to go well, or at least it's a step towards making the relationship better. It's not likely going to like make everything magically change all at once, but if it goes well, right, and more than likely, it's at least a step that you can build upon. Or it may go really, really bad. And that may be the clear indication that, okay, you know what, that we may be at an impasse here. Like this may be a working relationship that's not going to work, right? And we have a different problem now, right? But I would much rather have the conversation and find that out, right, sooner than later, right? Than sort of waffle and sort of live in this sort of, we don't communicate very well, and we don't talk very well, and it's just sort of weird. That's not a good place for anybody. Incidentally, I'll just make a quick plug. I actually published a guide, sort of a 2-page white paper guide on this very conversation this week in collaboration with Hub Technical Sales. So I'll make sure that you guys get the link. If you didn't see it on LinkedIn, I'll be sure that you guys get the link to that. Yeah. I would love to have you guys include that in the podcast publication, and encourage people, because of what we just talked about, that EOI, right? Expectation, observation, interpretation. That's one of the things that's spelled out in that guide, as is the matrix that kind of shows the differences between sales and sales engineers. So very, very timely conversation in that regard.
All right. Well, so I'm thinking, like, this has been a great conversation, and I know you have to go soon. I think this is like a perfect way to end it, unless you have like a final thought you want to give us, a final piece of wisdom that will have me thinking about and not sleeping over the weekend, because you got my gears turning.
I think the only reason you're not going to be sleeping over the weekend is because you have a new baby in the house, and it's probably.
I have nothing to do with that.
I think you have it. You had everything to do with that, my friend. And if we need to have that conversation, that's a different podcast, I think.
I'm just saying immaculate conception, but that's a different story. But no, no. Any final thoughts?
I wish I had some like magical pearl of wisdom, sort of, ready to just unleash. I just, at the end of the day, I use the term ego at one time. I mean, the more, and look, we all make the mistake where, particularly whether you're whether you're in sales or you're a sales engineer. If you're a sales engineer, more than likely you love the spotlight, right? You love to be the expert, right? You love to be, under the spotlight and, sort of sharing your knowledge and expertise. You love to be, put on the podium, right, so to speak, or the pedestal rather. And as a salesperson, right, we love to be the knight in shining armor, right? We love to be the one that closes the big deal of the year. But we have to be aware of our egos, right? And we have to, I think, particularly when dealing with one another, we just have to be prepared to set the ego down. And I think Scott and I talked about this when we were on the program. A big part of that is who's the priority in the conversation, right? If I'm the priority in the conversation, then I'm operating with ego, and that's not likely going to get me very far. But if the person that if I can make the mental decision, right, the conscious decision to make the other person the priority in the conversation, right, and or the customer the priority in the conversation, or the deal the priority in the conversation, and put myself sort of, I'm not saying be a martyr, right? Don't lay down and be a martyr, right? Don't be a doormat, but put your agenda secondary to, either the other person's priority or ultimately the customer. I think that sets the stage for very good conversations. If we can learn to make it not about us. This is not about me. It's about what's right for the customer. I think we're doing a lot better than we otherwise will be. So that's probably what I've got for you to close.
That's amazing. Thanks, Chris, and I will talk to you soon, I guess.
Guys, thank you so much for having me. I love you, and it's always a pleasure. So good to see you again. I can't wait till the next time. Thanks so much.
See you, Chris.
Thanks for coming on. See you.
All right, and we're done. So this is the second take for the outro. The last one I butchered it, so I'm just gonna let Benny talk. Go ahead, Benny.
All right. Well, I mean, I thought it was a great first take personally, but I mean, all in the spirit of first takes, as was the show we all just listened to. Goodness, what a good one.
Yeah. So, like, we were talking after the show. If I were to summarize it or to like simplify it as much as possible, it's all about communication, letting go of your ego, and if you're tried one way and it's not working, try a different way. If you try to talk to someone in one way and they got pissed off, and even if you don't want to walk on eggshell with your salesperson or SE, you still want to achieve results. So change the way you're doing things.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, definitely. Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's pretty much it. Go ahead.
Yeah. And like while today's conversation, and you said it as well, like while today's conversation was kind of focused or had the context of that relationship between a salesperson and a sales rep or sales engineer, sorry, or solutions architect or whatever it is. A lot of what we talked about could also be applied to other relationships as well, whether it be professional or personal. Same idea about communication, ego, trying it a different way or adjusting on whatever you're doing. All apply really well to other things. So it's really cool to have such a multifaceted conversation.
There was, I'm not sure if this is true or not, but like you were saying, it can be a part of any relationship. And something I heard, like Peyton Manning, after training, used to make his SEs run his receivers run routes for him after being tired, right? And he never thought about them being tired.
After the receivers were tired?
No. During his career,
right?
At the beginning of his career, they would do the training, and afterwards he would make them run routes for him so he can like pass the ball, practice passing the ball. Except they were tired, and he never thought about the fact that they were tired. I don't know if it's true or not, that the whole story, but the point is, he never thought like, hey, the receiver's job is hard. Right? He never put himself in their position. They're exhausted, and he's making them run routes. So it could be part of any relationship. If you play basketball, a point guard will never know how hard it is to be a center, and a center will never know how hard it is to be a point guard. Where the center is getting beaten, well, maybe not these days, where if you blow on someone, they get called for a foul. But back in the day when they get whacked in the head, like Dennis Rodman, or like we have to put ourselves in other people's shoes to understand what they're going through, what they want in order to achieve what we're trying to achieve. I guess.
Very well said. Yeah, agreed. I think we're getting there. I think we're starting to get there as a society. Well, but obviously we're not there yet. But
no.
But keep on paying it forward, I suppose, everybody out there. And it's kind of cool that I mean, it's a good thing that the good word is being spread, I suppose, that between Chris's trainings, I'm sure, like podcasts like ours, and I'm sure there's countless other conversations being had out there about how it is really important to have the perspective of your coworkers to be able to better work with them. But yeah.
Yeah, like pretty much anyone who wants to achieve anything has to understand what other people are thinking. Unless you're like Steve Jobs and have all the power in the world and can fire people, or people want to work for you because they're working on the most advanced stuff, and they're okay handling some abuse. But for us common folks, we're gonna need to get into other people's shoes to understand what they're going through, and to get them to do what we want them to do.
Great. Great Everlast song about said type of topic, what it's like, or even I think Beautiful by Eminem also covers the same type of idea about being in others' shoes and understanding what it's like to sing the blues.
Are we gonna have to record a third take? Because I have no idea what you just said.
Don't worry, it's all good.
All right, man. You want to take us out?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for listening to the show. Thanks a lot, Chris, for coming on. I do want to say, sounds like your TSA is one that companies actually do want in their business, as opposed to the other. So yeah, definitely check out all the resources we have on the page with respect to resources that Chris mentioned, and even check out past shows as well. If you haven't already, you've heard it before, but leave a review, leave a like. It really helps us out in any sort of podcasting app or that you're using. If you're watching this on YouTube, do leave us a like, subscribe, click the bell button. All that does help us out as well. And yeah, it's about all I have off the top. So thank you again for listening. Thank you, Chris, for being on. Thanks, Ramsey, for being here as well. Thank you, Benny, for also being here. You're welcome.
Third take, here we come. All right, for Benny, this is Ramsey signing off.